Welcome back everyone. Time to do another MacBook review, and this time it's between the MacBook Air 2014. Now, I did review the MacBook Air 2015. I have not done the newer models like the Retina MacBook Airs. I will probably end up doing that at some point, probably when they become a little cheaper. But with these older ones, what's really interesting is that I personally like them. I think they're pretty good for the most part, and for the price that you're going to pay for them, I think they're actually a pretty decent pickup, especially now in 2020. Now, the one thing I love about these older MacBook Airs would definitely be the I/O. So you still have USB ports, you still have a Thunderbolt port kind of. It's not like the newer ones, but it's still pretty good. And the design, the glow up Apple logo, I mean, there's still a lot of things and reasons to pick up these older ones. And the one thing I like about this MacBook Air specifically is that it is kind of considered still supported under macOS Big Sur. I mean, it's still completely supported. I probably wouldn't recommend anybody to install macOS Big Sur just yet. There's a lot of issues. I've not installed it on this one. I will probably do it at some point, probably within the next week or two. But I wanted to make this video just in case I ran into any issues or anything like that on this specific model. Now, the MacBook Air, I mean, I'm sure you guys all know, I mean, they're great MacBooks. They're very stable. The greatest thing about these MacBook Airs, I think, was that the biggest selling point was probably for college students. I don't think really heavy, user people who are, doing crazy things on their MacBooks or needed a really crazy machine, they weren't picking up the MacBook Airs. These were basically suited, I think, for an entry-level MacBook for a lot of students, college students, maybe people who needed a side MacBook if they were going somewhere or whatever. This was a great MacBook with a mixture of great battery life as well as pretty good performance for the most part, and it was light to carry around. You didn't have to carry around a huge bulky machine. Now, this is not a gaming laptop. It's not crazy powerful, but for the most part, it'll get the job done, I think, for everything you're going to throw at it. Now, looking around this specific MacBook Air, you do have a pretty thin design, but I will tell you, the newer MacBooks that just came out, the MacBook Air, the newer models, as well as the USB Type-C MacBooks with the touch bars and all those things, those probably are a little bit thinner and easier to hold in the hand than this one, but it's still pretty good in my opinion. Now, looking around, on the left side, you do have the MagSafe port, which is great. You have a single USB port, and you have that headphone jack. One thing I love about that MagSafe port is that it is that older one. It's not the newer one with the USB-C. So if you trip over this or whatever, you are able to go and actually recover from it, and it will just slip out, which is great. On the front, you had the lip open. You had a little bit of a little lid right there. And on the right side, one of my favorite things ever, you have the Thunderbolt port, which is great. Another USB port, which is awesome. And then that SD card slot, which is very, very cool. Now, they didn't have an HDMI on this thing, which I thought they did, which I guess I was thinking wrong. But that SD card slot is something that is very important to me. And honestly, I could probably go away from the USB ports and go to USB-C and the MagSafe and Thunderbolt, but I need an SD card. That is the one thing I need all the time. And the fact that this thing has it is extremely important, and I think it's probably one of the biggest assets for these older MacBooks is that SD card slot. Now, feeling it in the hand, it still feels extremely premium. It does not feel like a cheap machine at all, which is a humongous asset for these things as well. And when you carry it around, it doesn't feel cheap. And the fact that it's still supported is actually very cool as well. Now, the specific model I have does have kind of a weird screen, so keep that in mind. It's not necessarily the most premium looking thing either when it comes down to the display, but you still have that 13-inch screen, which is great. Now, the one thing that was very interesting about these older MacBook Airs is that the bezel around the screen wasn't black, like how we do have it on the MacBook Pros. It was actually the same color as the rest of the MacBook, which honestly, if you think about it, kind of makes more sense. But for me personally, I really don't care. I'm good either or. And you have that beautiful keyboard with a bunch of travel, which was also another humongous asset for this thing. I think a lot of people probably prefer the new 16-inch MacBook keyboards, but these ones were perfectly fine for me as well. I didn't really complain about them at all. The only complaint I have about these keyboards is that the power button is like within the keyboard and I accidentally hit it all the time. I never shut it off, but it's still something I do with my 2015 MacBook. And you still have that trackpad on the bottom as well, which I think was perfectly fine as well. I didn't really have any complaints or anything. Now it's the multi-touch, it's glass, it's all that stuff, which is great. Nothing really to complain about there either, which is really awesome. Now, I think a big thing between this MacBook Air and maybe other MacBooks that are for sale is that some people might just think like, oh, why would I buy this one? Why didn't I just buy, the 2015 MacBook, the 12-inch one? And I think that's a pretty good, comparison. I don't think many people are comparing this to like the newest MacBooks. I think most people are probably comparing this to those ones, the MacBook 12-inch models, but there's a lot of pros and cons for those as well. I've already reviewed a couple of those, and I think honestly, those are great for a certain amount of tasks, but if you're actually going and, using a MacBook, I think for the price, I think even like a MacBook 12 inch is good enough, but definitely when it comes down to it, this MacBook Air with this design, the thinness of it, the premium feeling of it, I mean, I picked this thing up and it doesn't feel cheap. It doesn't feel like a 2014 model. And the fact that this model actually kind of came from like 2010, 2011, the design didn't really change too much besides, the clicking buttons at the bottom. And that's a pretty impressive thing in my opinion. So the greatest thing about this MacBook, especially these older ones, is probably the repairability. You can upgrade a couple of things here and there, but if you have a bad battery, if you have a bad whatever, for the most part, you can replace it. It's still a process. It's still not easy, but it's easier than some of these newer ones, which is great. And with these MacBook Airs, they actually had a pretty good battery life. On this specific one, which I bought used, I'm having pretty good standby time. I use it a couple times here and there. I've used MacBook Airs before, and I've reviewed them on my channel, but when I use this thing, whenever I mess with it, it feels pretty good for the most part when it comes down to the battery life. Now, that's pretty much all the good stuff about it. I want to move into the power section, and this is probably the one area where, I can comfortably say that it's very, very average, especially now in 2020. Looking at all these apps that are demanding so much more power, so much more resources, having this type of MacBook wouldn't really cut it for my specific needs. Now, I'm not even that crazy of a power user. I edit a couple videos here and there, but now that I think about it, and I've been using this thing for a couple things here and there are some issues that, do come up. And I hate to say it, and I always love saying, pick up the old thing, pick up the old thing, whatever. With these MacBook Airs, they just don't have that much power compared to something like even a MacBook Pro. A 2014 MacBook Pro actually has pretty decent specs. But with this thing, it's just okay. This model has 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is really not that much. It does have an SSD in it, which is pretty impressive. It's thin, it has a couple things going on here and there, but for the most part, there's a dual core CPU within it. This one I think has the Core i5, the 1.4 gigahertz processor. You can turbo boost up to 2.7, which is good, but really everything else that I threw at it, it just wasn't really that great. It got a little loud, it got a little hot here and there. And for me using this thing as an everyday device, I probably wouldn't have that great of an experience with it. I think it would be pretty average. And I think if you're somebody out there who, demands a lot from a machine, this might not be a good way to go. I think if you've been able to use this thing from the time you got it up until now, I think that's a feat in and of itself and you should probably brag about it. But for me personally, I probably couldn't do it, in all honesty. Like I said, I love saying, pick out the older devices. And this one is kind of in that sweet spot. Now, if you get the top tier model with like 8 gigs of RAM, then that's kind of a different story. But even at that point, you might as well pick up like a 2014 or 2015 MacBook Pro Retina, Whenever I was doing anything with it, playing online games or, typing or whatever, it was pretty good, Like I said, this one has a bad screen, so I had to hook it up to a monitor. And, it gets the job done. I think for minor apps and minor tasks, if you're somebody who is a student, and you're just making a bunch of notes, if you're on Google Docs all the time, or if you're on Word or Excel or whatever, and you're having to do assignments and stuff, this is a pretty good machine, I think, for that. And I think even if you're like a small content creator, if you're making a video here and there, you have that SD card slot, which is very impressive. You have the standard USB ports, so you can easily go hook up a CD drive if you need to, or put a USB drive in or whatever. Like, you have that capability here. And the best thing about this is that because it's, so cheap and it's kind of older, you have those older IOs, so you don't have to spend the money to get the USB-C dongles or get the USB-C counterparts of a hard drive or something. You can save some money and get the older, USB drives. Now, they might not be as good or as fast or whatever as the newer ones, but they're still pretty good in my opinion. And that also has a lot of value. If you're somebody who's, doesn't have a lot of money to spend on a machine like this, picking up a machine like this will probably do you better in the long run, whether you realize it or not. But that will mean that you will probably have to, upgrade your device sooner. If you get a newer one, that'll prolong the life of it and you won't have to, wait as long to pick up the next one or whatever. You'll probably have to pick up a MacBook, pretty soon if you pick up this one, in my opinion. So this is how I'll break it down. And I think it makes sense, but I think, I kind of worded it a little weirdly. This MacBook Air, I think, is great if you're not really using MacBooks too much. Or if you're not going to use it like super heavy, like you can use it all the time and use it for everything. But if your everything consists of, video editing and making music and uploading this and coding and this and that and running things, like, you're going to get bogged down pretty fast on a machine like this, even with a top tier 8 gig model. If you move over to a MacBook Retina Pro or even like a, 2016 MacBook with the touch bar and things, like, I probably wouldn't recommend going there either, but those will have more power for you for a bit more money. With this thing, you're saving money, but you're also kind of giving up power and some other things like that. The biggest thing is power for me for this machine, and you don't really get it with this. So like I stated, if you're a student, if you're somebody who, kind of uses a MacBook here and there, and you like the ecosystem, you like being able to text from your MacBook and AirDrop and all that stuff, then this is a great machine, you know? I think this has a lot of value in terms of that, but for somebody who wants to use a bigger machine and, you know, wants to get something now and not have to upgrade every single year or whatever, then I think at least a 2015 MacBook Retina Pro would probably do you better. I would say 2016, but those have a lot of problems. I think the 2015 ones are a sweet spot. And, you know, I've used a 2015 MacBook Pro. I still use my 15-inch 2015 MacBook Pro for everything, but I do have an iMac that I use too. But I think for those people who are kind of in the middle, I would probably recommend not picking this thing up, but getting a 2015 Retina MacBook Pro. But if you still use this, if you like it, then go for it. Be my guest. But like I said, that 2015 one is probably the one I would end up going for. So that's really pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. More importantly, everything else. I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.